Sanji Chidang Saji Chunam La Chanchu Badu Dani Chasu Taki Jinsu Jibe Sunam Rula Binji Sanji Rupa Shu Sanji Chidang Chi Chunam La Chanchu Badu Dani Chasu Taki Jinsu Jibe Sunam Rula Binji Sanji Rupa Sanji Jidang Suji Chonam Chanchu Badu Dani Japsuji Dagi Jinsuji Bezanam Rola Binji Sanji Drupashu Sashi Busu Sushi Medata Rira Blinshi Nidhi Jimba De Sanji Jingdu Mikdeb Tukananda Shinla Juba Shu Sanji Namji Samba Dan Loye Jita Jita Vachi Chundu Mandib Chuji Kolo Kordo So, having recited the brief preliminary prayers that we do at the beginning of teaching, last night at the beginning I mentioned a little bit about how we receive the teachings by using the analogy of the pot. And as I explained, the third fault in listening to teachings is to be like the pot, which, although it is the correct way up, so liquid can go into it, and it doesn't have a hole in, so the liquid can be retained, nevertheless has some kind of poisonous elements within it. So the water mixes with those poisonous elements, and therefore if we drink it, it's very dangerous. So therefore, actually it's said in the teachings that there are 6 particular stains or mental attitudes that we need to avoid when we receive the teachings properly. So the first of those is pride. Pride is a really huge obstacle to receiving the teachings, because actually a proud mind is a mind that is closed. In terms of the teaching, it's a mind that thinks it already knows the teaching, so it has no need to listen. And that's why it's said that on the needle point of pride, not one atom of virtue can collect, because as the proud mind is a mind that is entirely closed, so nothing good can enter into it. So if we think, for instance, oh, I am very superior to the teaching, I know everything already, then actually it's a waste of time physically being present at that teaching, because we're not going to receive any. And then the second stain or fault that we have to avoid is lack of confidence or faith. If we have no faith, no confidence in the teaching, we won't pay serious attention to the instruction. It's like we've asked somebody for direction, how to get to a particular place, but we don't even bother to listen to what they say, because we have no confidence and respect in that instruction. So we need to really check that there isn't that lack of faith or lack of confidence in our mind. It's not that faith, when we're talking about faith or confidence in Dhamma, we mean blind faith. Actually, there are 3 types of faith in Dhamma. And the first is called clear faith. Clear faith is the initial confidence we feel when we see statues or other representations of the Buddha, and when we hear about the life stories of the Buddha and the great masters, we kind of feel an inspiration, a kind of confidence. It's not very reasoned confidence, but it is a confidence and beginning of openness. And then that faith grows and it becomes the second type of faith, which we call the faith of longing. Longing means that we see there are qualities in these objects to which we're drawn, like the Buddha and the great masters, and we long, we wish to have their qualities. The qualities we see in them, we wish to develop ourselves. And so that makes us engage more in the Dharma with openness and respect. And then the third and final type of faith is the faith of conviction. That is a faith based upon reasoning. When we've heard the teaching sufficiently and can understand for ourselves through reasoning how it is true. In particular, it's faith in the teaching of cause and effect, that suffering arises from non-virtue, that happiness arises from virtue, and that nirvana arises from the practice of the noble path. That kind of knowledge gained through examination and reasoning is the best type of faith, because it is an unshakable faith. But we begin with the kind of inspired faith or clear faith, then longing faith, and finally the faith of conviction. But if we don't listen to the teachings, we'll never get that. So we must have faith to even engage with the teachings initially. And then the third fault in listening to teaching is lack of effort. If we're lazy, if we don't apply ourselves with kind of effort to the teachings, there'll be no benefit. That's why the great master Zapatro Rinpoche says, Dharma does not belong to the rich or the poor, it belongs to those who make an effort. If we're not willing to work hard in listening to teachings and then reflecting over the teachings and finally meditating, then no qualities will arise. So when we go to the teachings, we should think this is the beginning of our practice, so that we take them seriously and put effort in. But if there's no effort, there'll be no result. So we should remember how, with what great difficulty the masters of the past gained these teachings and then transmitted them. Like in the case of the Lojong teaching, to receive the Lojong transmission, Atisha went all the way to Indonesia from India, which was a very perilous, very dangerous sea journey. And in the Namtar, the biography of Atisha, it explains how dangerous, how many storms there were on the way, and how the ship nearly capsized and so on. And then, out of his great kindness, Atisha then brought that teaching to Tibet from India. So we can think about the example that all those great masters of the past have left us. And there's one fact that it proves, that without effort we will not gain any realization. And then the fourth fault or stain to avoid in listening to teaching is distraction. As said, a mind that is distracted can make no virtue. So when we're in the teachings, we should pay attention to them, and when the mind wanders, bring it back, placing attention on the words and the meaning, not separating the words and the meaning, but focusing on them. It's said that when we listen to the teachings, we should be like a deer that is bewitched by the beautiful music played on a sitar or a veena, and entrances the deer so it becomes one-pointedly attentive to the music. So we must be with the teaching. So if our mind is wandering, then our body may be there, but our mind will not be. And then the fifth fault or fifth stain to avoid is like inappropriate meditation at the time of the teaching. It said that if we kind of close up and attempt to enter into a deep non-conceptual samadhi, meditative concentration state, this is inappropriate because we will not be paying attention to the teaching. That's appropriate at another time, but not in the teaching. So however fetching you may think you look in a teaching when you're displaying your samadhi, please keep it for later, because you need to be attentive to the teaching if you want to benefit from it. If you don't want to benefit, then that's okay. And then the sixth, yes, there is a sixth and final one, which is, happily enough, discouragement. What does that mean? That means thinking, oh, the teaching is very long, will it never end? My feet are hurting so much, and I really want a cup of tea or whatever. Please let it end quickly. If I let it end now. That discouragement, of course, obviously gets in the way of receiving the teaching. How do we overcome it? By thinking again of all the difficulties that the great practitioners of the past put up with. For instance, the Tibetan translators like Marpa Lotsoa and Drogmi Lotsoa and so on, who had to go to India, risking their life coming across the high passes. When they reached Nepal, many young Tibetans died, even in Nepal, let alone when they got to India. And they went through all that to receive the teachings. So the fact that we're a little bit tired, or wish the Lama would end more quickly, that is nothing, no discomfort in comparison with what they went through before. And if we want to gain realization, we must be able to overcome this kind of temporary obstacles, and therefore abandon discouragement. Be brave and strong in the very small matter of slight discomfort or tiredness in receiving the teachings. One of the great masters of the last half of the 20th century was a Lama called Chobji Tree Rinpoche, who you should know about, because of course he was one of the masters of His Holiness Karmapa and also Shama Rinpoche. Anyway, Chobji Tree Rinpoche was an extraordinary great master, but what is kind of interesting about him is that when his knowledge of Vajrayana was so great that when he started to any teaching, he was very, very enthusiastic, and he would continue teaching and teaching. And one of my lamas said to me that it was so difficult because he would go on 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. And of course everybody is desperate to go to the bathroom. But even the tulkus had to sit there. Nobody could leave until Chobji Tree ran out of steam with the teaching. So an hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours tops, it is nothing compared to what one may have to put up with. So those are the 6 stains which we need to avoid. Zapata Rinpoche explains them in great detail, so I've just summarized his explanation now. But I've done so because I think it's really important for us to learn how to learn the Dharma. If we don't approach the Dharma properly, then even though great Dharma might be taught, like for instance here we're listening to such great Dharma from His Holiness, nevertheless we will not get it. We will not get it properly. So we need to learn how to learn. And that's why traditionally Lamas often would at the beginning of a teaching explain these things in great detail. So I've just taken a little now. So tonight we're pressing on with the 7 points of Lojong, and we've reached the 6th point. The 6th point. So it says in Shama Kunchi Yonlak's commentary, the 6th point presents the Lojong commitments. The Tibetan word is damsi. Sanskrit word for that is samaya. So there's something interesting we have to explain right away. Samaya is actually a word from the secret mantra, from the Tantras. Samaya is a commitment that arises when we receive initiations. There are many different samayas or commitments that are given in different initiations according to the 4 sets of Tantras and in accord with whether it is a major or minor initiation. But essentially the word samaya is not a word in the ordinary or non-tantric Mahayana. It is not used there usually because it is a formal thing. In a tantric, in an initiation, you, the disciple, are asked to accept the samaya, and you say you do that. So, in fact, you signify you will keep whatever the commitments deriving from that initiation. You signify that you will keep them. So it is very formal to receive samaya. It is not some kind of general, kind of vague thing. It is a real precise thing. And if you've not received such tantric initiations, you don't have samaya, you don't have damsik, you don't have a tantric commitment. However, here in the Lojong teaching, the word has been borrowed. So these so-called Lojong samayas, or commitments, are not formal commitments. When Lojong is taught, you, the disciples, are not asked to accept a samaya or a commitment. So rather here it's used in a kind of poetic sense to mean these are instructions now which are about how you take the Lojong teaching seriously and how you avoid kind of acting against the spirit of the Lojong. So it's like it's a poetic exaggeration really to call them samayas or commitments, but it's to tell us that they are important. Okay, so I wanted to clarify that. And in fact this distinction will come up more or less right away now in the explaining the first line in point 6. Because the first line in point 6 from Geshe Chekwa says this: always train in the 3 basic principles. Always train in the 3 basic principles. It's like it's an imperative. You should do this. You should train in the 3 basic principles. So what are they? So I'll read now from Kunchi Yinlai's commentary. The first basic principle concerns not transgressing your commitments. And this really does mean now vows and pledges, vows and commitments. If you call yourself a Lojong practitioner, you must not brush aside even minor commitments. So, what is he referring to? From individual liberation vows to those of Vajrayana, however many commitments you have committed yourself to should be maintained faultlessly. So although the Lojong teaching, as I said, doesn't have its own specific commitments or samayas, you as a Dhamma practitioner will probably have vows and pledges. You will, having taken refuge, have at a very minimum the individual liberation vow as householders. The individual liberation vow, which covers householders, male and female, and novice monks and nuns, probationer nuns, and fully ordained monks and nuns. All those categories of practitioner accept one or other version of the pratimoksha, or individual liberation vow. Now, of course, the rules that have to be kept are different according to whether you're a lay person or a monastic. So for a layperson, the number of rules goes up to 5, the 5 so-called rules of training. But the essence of the individual liberation vow is to refrain from harming others. So that is the minimal way you can keep the individual liberation vow as a householder. So as I say, because you've taken refuge, you all at least will have the individual liberation vow in this form. But of course also, if you want to take the 5 rules of training specifically, then you can also do so, but you have to receive them from the Lama or from a senior member of the ordained Sangha. Then the second vow you will have is the Bodhisattva vow. This is a vow, a promise to maintain a certain behavior. In this case, the behavior that will lead you to Buddhahood for the sake of others. And this Bodhisattva vow can be taken either in the specific ceremony for the Bodhisattva vow, derived from the sutras, or it is taken in the beginning of every initiation, but in an abbreviated form. So I think almost all of you will actually already hold the Bodhisattva vow. And then the Vajrayana vow, well, the full Vajrayana vow you will have if you have received a major initiation in which you entered a mandala of one of the 2 highest sets of tantras, the Yoga Tantra set or the Anuttara Yoga Tantra set. If you receive such an initiation, such as Chakkasamvara for instance, you will also have the full Vajrayana vows. So these are the extent of the vows that you may have. And here Kunchuk Yonok is saying, whichever of these, up to all 3 of them that you've committed yourself to hold, you must not violate even the slightest part of them. Because if you do, if you break your vows, then that creates a great negative force which obstructs your practice. And in fact, in the worst case, makes obtaining any accomplishment from your practice impossible. So whatever vows you've taken, you need to keep to support your practice. The second basic principle, which you have to train in, Shama Kunchuk Yonok says, concerns refraining from nonsensical behavior or foolish behavior. So, what kind of foolish behavior? Well, where do we start? Where indeed do we start? Yes. Well, as the old blues song says, don't start me to talking, I'll be here all night long. So, I'll stick with what Kunchuk Yonok mentions. All reckless acts, such as cutting down haunted trees. Why might you do that? Well, Rinpoche explained, that is to show you're somebody who's really tough and fearless. Hey, there's some trees there, they've got ghosts, but I can cut them down. I'm not worried about those ghosts. So it's a kind of spiritual boasting. Or keeping company with lepers in order to convince others that you are free of self-cherishing. It doesn't mean you shouldn't help lepers or other such afflicted people. It means pretending that you're so spiritually advanced that you will not catch leprosy. So you can hang out in the most dangerous places expose yourself to harms, but you'll not be harmed because you are so realized. So there's as Rinpoche summed these up when he taught this text, it's being a spiritual charlatan that is the object that we're concerned with here. Any forms of exaggerating and claiming realization falsely by doing things to make people think, wow, he's so liberated, wow, he's such a Mahasiddha, wow, he's such a great yogin. All these just forms of self-cherishing while pretending you're free of it. So they should be abandoned. Not just because they trick others, but because you yourself lose the path by doing them. So avoid any such ostentatious behavior to show you're realized. And then the third basic principle to training concerns not falling into partial behavior. What is this? Continuing, it says, train in equanimity. Equanimity means balanced mind. Balanced mind. Train in equanimity by rejecting all forms of partiality. Remember, in a way, the whole spirit of the Lojong is to stop rigidly dividing the world into the things you like and the things you don't like, but instead accepting all with great openness and courage. So in your practice, it's got to be like, your practice has got to be 360 degrees all round practice. So partiality would be, Kunjana says, such as being patient when people are aggressive to you, but not when gods or demons do. So you are angry when supernatural beings are aggressive to you, but patient when humans. Whereas in fact, you should be patient with all sentient beings, whether physical or non-physical, or respecting those who are important and scorning those who are not. Again, respect should be for all sentient beings. As it says in the first of the 8 verses of mind training, realizing that all beings are as precious as a wish-fulfilling gem, I will cherish them all as supreme. It doesn't say just the important ones and the rest I don't care about. It says I will cherish all sentient beings as supreme. So that is this, again, the spirit of Lojong. Or being partial by being kind to loved ones and hostile to enemies. So you get the picture. So your compassion for others, your patience towards others, it must be total. It can't have some you include and some you exclude. It must be for all, or else it is not true Lojong. It's like, we may say, well, I'm okay really because I love some people. Okay, there's a lot of people I don't like, but I love some people, so I must be on the right track. But then, as the great Sakya Pandita has pointed out, even vampires love their own children. They don't like anybody else, but they do love somebody. But that doesn't make them not vampires. They're still vampires. So, similarly with us, we must try to develop all-round practice, all-round love and compassion. So now the second point in the root text. Transform your approach while remaining natural. Transform your approach while remaining natural. You're all too young to remember, but in the old golden days of the 60s, the hippies, there's a character in a hippie comic called Mr. Natural. You may check him out on the internet. He was truly, as you kids say, cool. Anyway, it just reminds me of him here. Transform your approach while remaining natural. So, Shamakuncha, I guess, explains, you used to, once upon a time, you used to treasure yourself above all. So before you started practicing Lojong. Now that others have become more important, your physical behavior should be consistent with the Dharma while remaining natural. What does he mean? Well, what he means is revealed now. It is said that Thanks. It is said that Lojong practice. Yeah. Yes. I think there's a message coming through. from Hippie Central. Yeah. I just can't get down with this technology, you know. It is said that Lojong practice must be very effective, yet very discreet. Okay. It should ripen in your mind without being obvious to others. So now it's clear what he means. Lojong is such a amazing thing in a way. We're really trying to take the sufferings of others onto ourselves. So the last thing we should do is make any display of that. Because if we make a display, we've subverted the practice. We're trying to boast of our compassion. We're trying to make a show of our compassion. So the Lojong practitioner must always be very low key, very much like under the radar, because otherwise it's like making a mockery of the practice. And that's again like if you read the histories of the early Kadampa masters, they were like that. They never made a great display. They always lived in very, very quietly, often in remote places, in order to carry out their practice effectively. So by practicing very discreetly and quietly, as Rinpoche said, we won't be swayed by praise. Our head won't be turned by somebody saying to us, "Oh, you're so compassionate. Oh, it's so wonderful what you're doing, taking the suffering of all beings upon themselves, upon yourself." And then the third line of the root text says, "Do not speak of others' infirmities." Do not speak of others' infirmities. Kunchi Yanlek explains, "Do not use harsh words to speak of others' physical impairments." So, for instance, if they're blind or have some other kind of physical defect. Or Dharma-related failings, such as unseemly moral conduct. Because to begin with, this can hurt other people, and secondly, it will corrupt you. If you enjoy focusing on others' negativities, then how can you have an open heart? How can there be any love and compassion there if you're actually enjoying the defects of others, even if you have them? So again, the Lojong practitioner avoids that. Patrul Rinpoche tells a very good story in this respect. There it is from the early Kadampa tradition. One day, one Geshe called one of his friends, another Geshe, said, come to tea with me, I have some very exciting news. So the other Geshe came along, and he sat down, and the servant poured out tea, and then said, "Well, what about this exciting news then?" So the first Geshe, who had invited him, said, "Yes, that Geshe in the next monastery, he has a mistress. He's breaking his vows." So they were very excited talking about that. But then Patrul Rinpoche says, well, who had the greatest fault here? It wasn't actually the Geshe who broken his vows, that's bad. But it was the Geshes who enjoyed talking about it. They had the bigger moral fault than the Geshe who'd actually broken his vows with the mistress. So that is kind of showing how we must always avoid enjoying such, talking about such things. And then the root text says, never judge others. Never judge others. So, Kunchi Yanlek says, if you see others' faults, those of living beings or sentient beings in general, but more specifically, the faults of those people who have entered the gates of the Dharma, you should think, this must be my own impure perception. They cannot possibly have such faults. So, of course, as we heard in the teaching on Ultimate Bodhicitta, all appearances are arising from the mind. So what actually is arising at any time is the ripening of imprints in the alaya, the base consciousness. So it is not something which is truly external to us, but is actually the play, the projection of mind. So when we seeing others, and we see them as doing bad things, this is related to our mind. So the first thing we should do is understand that. Otherwise we will get caught up in enjoyment of liking, being happy to see and judge others for doing wrong things, and our arrogance will grow, our dislike for others will grow, and our heart will close up, and there'll be no space there for loving kindness and compassion. So that's the way we must understand. Whatever I'm seeing is projection of my mind. What's more, of course, we tend to project onto others the faults which are kind of very strong in us. So there's no way we should rely on on our perceptions as if they were free, as if they were uncontaminated. So this is a training to overcome a bad tendency in us, the tendency to enjoy judging others. But be careful. This is not kind of the non-judgmentalism of whether acts are good or bad. We should not condemn people, but we can clearly distinguish, as we must, between acts which are positive, virtuous, that bring happiness, and acts which bring suffering. So Lord Buddha never said there is no difference between virtue and non-virtue, or do not judge actions. In fact, to sum up his teachings, we have the sloka: cease to do evil, strive to do good, and purify the mind. So of course we must make a judgment based on the teaching and reasoning about which acts are good and which are bad. But when it comes to projecting kind of intrinsic faults on others, then we must see this is actually projection of our own imprints on them. We have to distinguish between those two things. It's very important. And then the root text says, purify whichever affliction or disturbing emotion, purify whichever affliction is the strongest first. Shabbakunti Yonai says, once you have identified which of your disturbing emotions is the strongest, gather together all of the antidotes and subdue that affliction first. Actually, Rinpoche said that he felt that this line could actually be put into point number 2, the main training in Bodhicitta. Specifically, it could go just before the specific advice on how to meditate on emptiness in order to cure any stronger, to kind of weaken any strong affliction we may have that would otherwise obstruct us doing the practice. So here it's in the 6th point. So if we look at ourselves dispassionately, or professionally, as His Holiness is saying, if we look at ourselves dispassionately, we will most likely see that there is one kind of disturbing emotion which is strongest. Not that we only have one, I think we, all of us, have all 6 major and all 20 minor disturbing emotions, but most likely one is very strong for us. And so we need to dispassionately investigate. And we need to do it dispassionately, because actually we may not understand which one at first, because before we start to practice and look at ourselves with detachment, we may have a kind of assumption about ourselves. Like, for instance, it's very common among people who are attracted to Buddhism to think, well, I'm a pretty peaceful guy, really, so anger's not my problem, it must be something else. I'm not angry like all those kind of militarists and all those kind of people. I'm really chilled and kind of laid back and peaceful. Actually, mostly within the heart of every pacifist is a raving kind of militarist. It's just the way. You'll find out after sitting for a while. You'll see how you really are. So with a little bit of dispassion and investigating a little bit, we can find which is our strongest disturbing emotion at the moment. Yeah. And inability with technology is obviously high on my list. Yeah. It must be all the jokes I made about Madonna before. It's kind of this is Madonna's revenge. Yeah. So, in the Abhidharma, it actually says there are specific antidotes for specific disturbing emotions. So, for instance, if hatred and anger is the one that you see as your strongest problem, you should concentrate on loving kindness to weaken that. On the other hand, if desire is the strongest one, leave the loving kindness for now. You're already quite keen on it, albeit a little bit too physically. So you meditate on the impurity of the body. That's good for you. If ignorance is the big one, then meditate on the links of dependent origination, and so on. So there are specific remedy meditations you would use for this. So then, the next line of the root text, abandon all hope of results. That's difficult, isn't it? Because in Dharma, in a way, we've got a hope for result, Buddhahood. Yes, very, very big hope. So, this is what Kunchu Yonla says. As you practice Lojong, you should abandon all self-centered desires. There's the distinction. Because sometimes people raise this with me and say, surely it's a contradiction. We're told not to have any attachment in Buddhism, but then we say we're attached to becoming a Buddha. But there's a good attachment in that way, a good attachment to the benefit of others. So it's self-centered attachment or desire we want to become free from. Abandon all self-centered desires, such as wishing for wealth and honor in this life. You know, if this will subvert our Dharma practice. If we practice with this in mind, then we will not break free from worldliness. That's why in the Dojichang Tumma prayer we say that renunciation is the foot of meditation. Bless me to be free from any thought of gain and honor. Otherwise I'd not even be able to enter into the path. Or wishing for the happiness of gods or humans in the next. Well, sometimes people came to Lord Buddha and said, I wish to have wealth in the next life. And Buddha would say, practice giving, you'll be wealthy. Sometimes they would say, I want to be reborn in the human realm or God realm. And Lord Buddha would say, practice moral discipline, it will lead to that. So those goals aren't always wrong, but they're just not big enough for the Lojong practitioner. So for us, if we're serious about Lojong, we have to let go, even of that wish for a good rebirth. And even this, or wanting to attain nirvana for yourself alone. That's it. For yourself alone. Because that is not the Buddhahood. That is not the non-dwelling nirvana for which we strive in Mahayana. It is the mere cessation of one's own personal suffering, which Hinayanists try to gain. So even this we must give up if we are real Lojong practitioners. And Rinpoche added to this also that we should give up looking for good meditation experiences. Attachment to transient, to impermanent meditation experiences is a real blockage. That's why in the Dzogchen and Mahamudra teachings it says, avoid the traps of stillness, of non-conceptuality, of clarity and bliss, the three traps. Avoid them. So don't look for such experiences in your meditation. Don't strive for such experiences, because otherwise you become trapped. So abandon all hope of result. Aim only at Buddhahood for the benefit of others. And then Geshe Chekwa says, avoid poison food. I saw that there's some very advanced Lojong practitioners. When I came back this evening, I saw that some of you really practicing Lojong very well because you were eating at a stall over there, at Saikivi. So I salute you. Yeah, you are really amazing Lojong practitioners. Yeah. So how does Shama Kuncha Yinlak explain this? Mixing any virtuous practice with the assumption that things actually exist and self-cherishing is like mixing food with poison, so give it up. So now, it's like this. If I try to practice sending and taking, then if I feel, oh, I'm really the virtuous person, I've got this stock of goodness and virtue here and happiness, and I'm really so kindly giving it to this person out there, that poor person who has no such good qualities as me. And here is this practice I'm really doing. It's really something, I'm really giving something real to this person there. If I practice with that, then the practice is subverted. Why? Because it's reinforcing ego clinging. Instead of being an expression of ego-free mind, ego-free heart, it's an expression of ego clinging and ego cherishing. Because I'm taking myself so seriously, I'm trying to develop a status and a feeling of solidity through this practice. It will lead to pride and further self-clinging. And of course, contempt for the person who I think I'm giving something to. So that's why in the Lojong, as we said a few times now, we're trying to bring together the two. The ultimate bodhicitta perspective, no self, no other, no giving, with the open-heartedness of sending and taking. So sending and taking is a food, but it becomes poisoned if I impose these labels and these concepts of self and other as something solid onto it. So it shows, as I was saying, that we need to bring the two together always. Ultimate and conventional, emptiness and compassion. Then it's really effective. Otherwise it's just subverted and another game the ego plays. And then the next line seems a little kind of strange at first. Next line from the text. Do not make a point of constancy. Constancy means like being always undeviating Well, usually being undeviating is good, but there can be times when it's not. Kuchi Hyondak explains, this means do not harbor resentment. You see, the resentful person is like this. Somebody does them harm, and they never forget. They calculate exactly how much harm that person did to them, and they hold it in their mind resentfully until such time, of course, as they can pay them back. So it's a calculating mind that is holding anger or hatred in itself. How can this mind, how can that heart practice Lojong? As Nagarjuna says in the friendly letter, thinking he harmed me, he abused me, he criticized me, one will never sleep. But if one gives up hatred, one can easily rest. So that's what we must do. Don't hold on to grudges. We have to let them go, or else we cannot practice effectively. Now I know the great Italian political philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli said that it's necessary, if anybody harms you, always to harm them back. But that may be good political advice, but we're not politicians, so we follow Atisha and not Machiavelli. So, next line from the root text. Avoid the agitation of hurtful talk. Avoid the agitation of hurtful talk. The commentary is very brief. Do not answer others' insults with harsh replies. Do not uncaringly call attention to others' transgressions or faults. I think everybody's heard this, this statement that Lord Buddha, has advice to what to do when somebody criticizes you. Lord Buddha says, well, if somebody gives you a gift but you don't take it, then it returns to them. So similarly, if somebody is kind of slandering or speaking insultingly to you, don't take it. You don't need to accept it. You don't need to hold on to it. And in that way, your mind remains free and easy. You're not corrupted by the gift they're trying to give to you. And also, of course, you've created a space in which it may be possible to reply positively to that person in a way which will encourage them out of their negative mind, their negative attitudes. But if you get drawn in to kind of retaliating, to striking back verbally, then you both kind of spiral downwards. So we don't do that. Of course, in the Jase Lalen, the 37 practices of a Buddha's child, Jase Tome said, when somebody says something nasty about you, if it spreads throughout the whole world, you should simply bow down to that person as your teacher. Because, of course, among other things, they're giving you an opportunity to practice patience. So they're like, as we were discussing earlier, like a teacher to you. And then, a little bit similar really, the next line of the root text, do not wait in ambush. So the meaning is this: when others have hurt you, you might keep it hidden in your heart until the time for revenge is nigh, it's like arrived. But give it up. That's rather like the line about constancy. Because again, it's like you hold the insult or the harm, the injury inside you, and it's like a poison is growing worse and stronger in your system, and so you're really a slave. When we hold this memory of an insult in our heart, that person who insulted us, he or she is our master, Actually, they may have walked on, they may have done all kinds of other things, but we're still brooding about it, still waiting to pay them back when the time comes that we can. So we're a slave, and they're kind of unconcerned. They've probably even forgotten what they did to us. So we have to free ourselves from that type of mind. Then the next line. Do not focus on others' sore points. I think those sore points are more like vital spots. Yes, don't focus on those vital spots. Continuing like explains, this means do not expose people's hidden faults. You see, it might be like this. Somebody has some kind of weakness. They're very sensitive about that. They try to keep it hidden from others. Maybe even try to keep it hidden from themselves. But we want to have power over them, so we draw attention to that. It's just an act of cruelty. Now, of course, I've met some people who say, but I'm a great teacher. I'm very fearless. I'm just like Marpa, so I can point to this person's hidden spot. But I haven't yet met any of them who are like Marpa. Rather, I see that this is just a kind of form of domination and cruelty. So even if we can see people's weak spots, even if we want to help them, we don't draw attention to them directly, because that just makes them feel more weak, more defensive, more guilty. Instead, we try to help them in a way to gain strength, not to bring them down. And so continues, nor should you misuse, this is not something you're going to be doing very often, nor should you misuse the life mantras of supernatural beings. So like Guru Padmasambhava was able to make the aggressive spirits swear loyalty to the Dharma because he could control their life force. He knew the kind of life mantras. But he did this with just pure compassion for them. If on the other hand, out of a kind of black magic wish to gain power over such beings, so that they'll do our bidding, selfish bidding, we use their life mantras, then it's very harmful. Or use other methods which may cause great damage to others' minds. So it's like whatever secret power you may be tempted to use over another person or being, you mustn't do so. And then the one for the farmers among you here. Do not burden a cow with an ox's load. Do not burden a cow with an ox's load. Maybe for Germans among you, do not burden a Trabant with a BMW's load. Yeah. Do not burden a cow with an ox's load. So what does it mean? When saddled with an unwelcome duty or reprimand, do not try to cheat and pass it on to others so that they become the patsy. Patsy is American, you know what a patsy is, an American expression. The patsy is the fall guy. If you ever watch the great film noir movies like with Humphrey Bogart, you'll see that for a case to be wrapped up, there's always got to be somebody who takes the rap, as we used to say in the old days, who's going to go to prison for the crime. So that's the patsy, the person who all the trouble falls upon finally. So our American translator here has tried to make kind of colloquial expression. Do not pass it on to others so they become the patsy. So what is going on? If you're given a duty, you should do it. Don't look around for somebody else to pass it on to, because that's selfish. Rather, step up and do what you've been asked to do. So do not give what is really the duty for an ox to a cow. Do not give your duty to somebody else's. Then next, do not play to win. Do not play to win. What does this mean? As in, okay, play to lose. As in, actually, in England, we make a big thing of that. You know, we used to do that. Play up, and play the game. Playing's the thing. Winning's not important. But I still see we have won the World Cup once. Or maybe some of you don't think we really did. Anyway, do not play to win. Do not use different techniques to acquire collective resources for your private enjoyment. So that is the point. The point here. It's a way of cheating. Do not use stratagems in order to gain things for yourself. Do not be a schemer. Do not be calculating and use trickery to make things come your way. In Dharma, we should have the attitude: whatever happens is actually perfectly appropriate according to karma. So we don't try to bend the world. We don't try to bend the universe to our wishes, and that is what playing to win really means. Because that kind of mind is totally opposite to the openness and acceptance, and yes, joyfulness of Lojong. It's a mind that's dissatisfied and is scheming. It wants things always to be different. So with cunning, it tries to make them different. We can't do that and practice Lojong at the same time. And then the next line, it says, do not misuse magic. Do not misuse magic. Actually, in other translations of this line, it says, do not do things backwards. But it means like, don't do things in the wrong way. Let me explain from Kunchuk Yunlek. This means, do not try to bolster your self-image by taking defeat upon yourself. Okay, so now we get it. Don't use the Lojong teachings or other teachings and practices in a way contrary to their purpose. When we practice sending and taking, our self-image, how we look, should be the very last concern. All that our concern should be that we're open to the sufferings of others. We have no more room than for others. We have no room for ourselves in that heart. So if we are practicing Lojong, practicing send and taking, but just thinking all the time, this makes me look really good, this makes me look like a really great bodhisattva, we're not practicing send and taking. We are misusing or perverting the teachings. Or, he says, or practicing Lojong like a magic ceremony in order to pacify demons, malevolent forces, or maladies. Well, we touched on this. You see, of course, in Tibet, as in most cultures, there are rituals used for subduing and controlling demonic forces, ghosts, spirits, and so on and so forth, Nagas, lords of the earth, and all, so on and so forth. But our Lojong approach to such things is different. We don't want to subdue them because we don't fear them. In fact, we have love and compassion for any being, whether physical or non-physical, whether a friend or an apparent harm doer. We have no exclusion, so nobody's left outside our kind of radiation of loving kindness and compassion. So if you practice Lojong, send and taking, to subdue and control spirits, you're subverting it, you're perverting it, you're corrupting it. It isn't for that reason. And then, something I guess you do a lot, do not turn a god into a demon. Do not turn a god into a demon. What does this mean? Well, it's one of those sayings, really. So now we'll see what it means for us who are trying to practice the Lojong. So, like gods, the devas, the Hla, they're, like on the good side of samsara. Kacho, we say, the white direction. They're not enlightened, but we respect them. They've practiced virtue and got to the God realms. Maras, on the other hand, they're principles of confusion. So, they're on the nakcho, the dark side. So, do not turn those, the good ones, into the bad ones. Here's what Kunchen Yinla says. If the practice of Lojong has reinforced your pride and arrogance, then the practice has not been effective, and the Dharma is no longer the Dharma. Your practice is no longer Dharma. In other words, you've taken a god, something virtuous, something wonderful, something positive, the Lojong practice, and by using it just to inflate yourself, just to become even more arrogant and proud than before, you've turned the good Dharma into something bad. A god, metaphorically speaking, has become a demon. So, this is crazy. Kunchen Yinla says, to do this is as senseless as trying to placate, pacify, an evil spirit of the East by sending ransom to the West. The evil spirits over there in the eastern direction, and but you're sending the ransom goods that you would give in traditional rituals to buy off the demon. You're sending it in the wrong direction. In other words, your Dharma practice is not touching your ego. In fact, it's making it not dissolving your ego. It's doing the exact opposite. It's making it bigger. So don't subvert Lojong in that way by becoming arrogant through practicing it. As Kunchen Yinla says, accordingly, having abandoned vanity and self-cherishing, be everyone's most humble servant. In Geshe Lama Tampa's 8 verses of mind training, he says, whenever I'm with other people, I would take the lowest and give to others the high place. And this is the spirit of Lojong. We have respect for others. That's all we want is the benefit and happiness of others. We don't want anything for ourselves out of the Lojong practice. So if we are taking something from ourselves, like gaining some pride and some status and some arrogance, we're subverting the practice. It's rather like we're taking the gas out of the gas tank of the car and put it into something else. So that is why this kind of, again, this very simple, undercover, flying under the radar kind of approach is necessary for Lojong practitioners. And then the final line of the sixth point. Do not look, the translation says, do not look to make pain part of pleasure. Okay, that, I think there are probably nightclubs that specialize in that, but so is maybe no, this is not 51 Shades of Grey. Yeah, no, this is something else. So hold on there. Calm down. Do not look to make pain part of pleasure. So this is how he unpacks this is like a scenario from monastic life. So we'll have to, for as lay followers, we will have to find a kind of equivalence to this in our situation. So here's like a monk is thinking like this: if my friends or Dharma brethren were to die, their food, money, texts and shrine objects would be mine. So it's like, that is it. You're trying to profit from somebody else's pain. That is it. You're looking to gain an advantage out of a difficulty coming to others. So that's the first. But then the monk thinks even more. If my jindak, my sponsor, my benefactor, was struck by fatal illness, I would receive plenty of offerings. Because, of course, at that time, there would be pujas. There would be pujas to do. Then we'd have to go to recite the pujas, and there'd be plenty of offerings would be given at that time. Or another thing one could think, if a great meditator, Gomchen, like one of my fellow meditators, were to die, his wealth and influence would become mine alone. This town is not big enough for the both of us. We're both great meditators, but he's getting all the attention. So wouldn't it be good if he died? Because then I'd get all the offerings and I would be the famous one. We might think, if my enemy were to die, no one would bother me any longer, and that would make me happy. It's kind of obvious now what is going on. So, continue. Concludes, thoughts such as these, the desire that others might suffer so as to ensure your own pleasure, must be rejected. Of course, because they are totally incompatible with the Lojong. So those were all the points of the 6th point of Lojong. I said the Lojong commitments, and you can see that all of them are ways in which we might violate or contradict or break the very attitude that we're trying to develop through Lojong, which is everything is for others, nothing is for this. Self-clinging and self-cherishing, and instead cherish others. If we still kind of carry on with these ways of behaving and looking at things, then there is no room in us, no room in our heart for Lojong to occur. Now, of course, as His Holiness has said so strongly, the imprints of negativity are so deep. They're not part of our mind, but they kind of encrust it. There's such strong encrustations. So I know we will sincerely enter into the Lojong, but then inevitably we'll catch ourselves having these kind of thoughts, having these kind of behaviors coming up. We shouldn't despair then. We shouldn't think, oh, well, I'm really such a hypocrite, I'm not fit to practice Lojong. Rather, we should acknowledge them, regret them, and let them go, and carry on striving in the Lojong. Because the Lojong is for beginners like us. It is for complete beginners, who are just like us, bags of neurosis and self-clinging and self-cherishing. It's just for us. In fact, the great disciple of Geshe Chekawa, Geshe Chilpupa, he discusses in his Lojong commentary, what philosophical view do you need to have to practice the Lojong? Because for different practices, different kind of philosophical understandings are necessary. But he says for Lojong, the philosophical view you need is just your own ordinary self-clinging. That'll do. Because that's what we've got to work on. So, yes, although the Lojong is demanding, it is for people just like ourselves. So therefore, inevitably, even though we try to practice it sincerely and genuinely, we will see these things coming up in ourselves. But as I say, we mustn't kind of take that as a sign we can't practice. Rather, it's a sign, of course, we need to do more practice, to persist in practice and expose these faults and let them go. So we have one more point to do, the 7th point, but I think we made such progress, and now we can pause for this evening and finish that 7th point tomorrow. So why don't we sit for a couple of minutes, and then there'll be time for His Holiness has started this, so I'll continue the same vein. 3 questions. But I can't promise to answer in the same way as His Holiness, of course. But let's meditate for a couple of minutes first. Poden sawelam rumbo che dagi chiwo peme dinshini kadin chimbu gani jezun de kusun tuji nerdra sando som. A deep peace settled on the assembly.
I have a question. It seems like Lojong is like a great tool to detect.
Sorry?
It seems like Lojong is a great tool to detect self-clinging.
Yes.
To find all the clues within yourself. So it's maybe developing the awareness for seeing the stains within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And in Vajrayana practice, is it about the pure view of pure awareness?
Yeah.
Is there any conflict in practicing both, or do they support each other?
Well, ultimately there is no conflict, no. And the ultimate meaning, like how the great masters practice, would be that Lojong reaches its fulfillment in the Vajrayana practice, because for instance, when we meditate on the Vajrayana deities, then we are not only transforming our own disturbing emotions, but directly transforming the disturbing emotions of all beings, because we see all beings as deities. So that is like transforming them, placing them in the state of Buddhahood, which is like, yes, ultimate sending of goodness to sentient beings. And at the same time, we purify all their disturbing emotions at the same time as our own when we practice the Vajrayana deities. But usually we consider that Lojong is like a precursor to serious Vajrayana practice. For some people it's enough. The time is not right for them, circumstances are not right, or their inclination is not ready, doesn't draw them to Vajrayana. So they would make a lot of progress just by practicing the Lojong. So I would say that generally the way that the great masters teach Lojong in regard to Vajrayana is as a preliminary. So for instance, the great Zapata Rinpoche, he very much stressed that Lojong should be seen as part of the Nundro, part of the Nundro for Dzogpa Chenpo, and so he taught it in that way, because he felt that without the change in our attitude to the world that Lojong brings about, we wouldn't really be mature enough to practice Vajrayana. So I think that is the way they're reconciled, by Lojong serving as a necessary precursor, necessary preparation for practicing Vajrayana really effectively. But then, as I say, when we're really accomplished in Vajrayana, we can see that even in this deity sadhana, we are doing sending and taking, not through breathing, like the specific instruction here in Lojong, but actually through how we radiate transformation out to the world, and how we purify all the poisons. So I think that's how it is really. They're not necessarily a contradiction, but we need to know the system of Lojong very well, and then the Vajrayana very well. And if we don't know either properly, we'll probably make a mess.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the teachings.
Okay.
And can you please explain a little bit more what should practice desire types?
Oh, how desire types should practice. Yeah. Yes. Well, okay. If we're a beginner, then the first thing we need is the support of good behavior, and that is provided by the individual liberation vow, because that is like the way that we create the necessary space in our lives. So, and therefore, in the individual liberation vow for householders, it's taught how to have good, wholesome relations with good, wholesome sexual relations. Of course, for monastic, it means celibacy. But either way, that is a good environmental change that can support inner change. So then, at a level of inner change, but still for a kind of comparative beginner, the desire type of person needs a remedy meditation. And a remedy is something you use for a time, but you don't use it forever. So if there's an imbalance in you, that means desire is very strong, and it's obstructing your practice, then you need to meditate on the, so to speak, something that will change your image of others' bodies, because I'm using sexuality as the obvious kind of reference point here, rather than say food, which could also be an object of desire. So if your sexual desire is such that it's disturbing you and even impelling you to do stupid things, then you use a remedy. What? Well, if, for instance, you think about it like this: what I'm attracted to is in a way a mental image. I'm projecting a mental image of inherent desirability upon these people I meet. But it is just my projection. So how about if I change my projection? How about, for instance, if I project onto it how a medical student would see this body in the mortuary or in a operating theatre? And there they would see it, of course, in a very different way than I'm seeing it right now. They wouldn't be seeing any glamour or attractiveness in it. They'd be seeing it as a kind of collection of impure substances. Is that a truer view? No, it's just an alternative view. But it will cool you down. It will calm you down. And that will help. But it's not an ultimate remedy. The ultimate remedy is emptiness. The ultimate remedy is to see that actually all appearances, including this seemingly desirable one, are empty. But that's not an intellectual interpretation or an afterthought, because that doesn't free us from the compulsiveness. It's when our experience of emptiness is strong enough that as the very appearance arises, we realize in its arising it is empty. Like the way when we see a reflection of moon in the water, we don't have to tell ourselves afterwards it was empty. We know it is just a reflection. There's nothing to cling on to or nothing to grasp. So that is the position, that's the use of remedy meditations. They're there to be used by comparative beginners when they have a major kind of obstacle caused by a disturbing emotion, but you mustn't take them too much. Because, for instance, if you use that remedy of that body being just a bag of medical substances too long, you would start to develop another disturbing emotion, which is hatred. So you use it, it cools you down, and you let go of the remedy. That's how remedy meditations have to be used, sparingly and intelligently. Of course, in Vajrayana, we have a different way of relating with objects, which is the pure view of seeing all objects as deities and mandalas. But to be able to do that, we need already to have some experience of emptiness. So that is why that is not so suitable to teach to beginners, and certainly not suitable to teach to anybody who's not received Vajrayana initiations.
Thank you. So, can you recommend, for example, the time, how long to do this kind of meditation? For example, every day, 5 minutes?
Yeah, something short like that, until you feel relaxed again.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yes. Yes, okay. I think we're on to number 3 already.
Yes, I was counting.
Yes, time flies when you're having fun.
It's just, thank you for the teaching.
Okay.
This is more a translation question, because I thought you're the perfect person to translate me this.
Oh, no, I don't know. I'm not that good.
When the Swift Rebirth prayer, Karmapa writes, supplicating the factual word of a saint. And this is something I don't understand.
Oh, yes. Can you pass me the text? Yeah, but I think they've changed that in the new translation, haven't they? The factual word of the saint, yeah. Drangson Dempi, Munsik. Okay. Well, the first word that is important here is Drangsong. Drangsong is Tibetan for rishi. And a rishi is like a sage from the Vedas. The Vedas are the ancient Indian scriptures, even earlier than the Upanishads. The Vedas are the oldest scripture in India, and the rishis are said to be kind of like supernatural beings whose every word is absolutely true. They cannot deviate from the truth. And in fact, the Tibetan translation of this term rishi, drangsong, means like straightness. You know, they can't lie or deviate in any way. In Indian mythology, it's the rishis who speak the Vedas, the words of the sacred, eternal scriptures. So it's I guess suggesting that the munsik, mun is called aspiration, and sik is words. So it's like the aspiration words that have like utter truth about them, like the truth spoken by a rishi. That's the real kind of significance of this phrase. I don't have the copy of Tinley Tulku's new translation with me, so I can't remember how he's translated it. But that's a kind of unpacking of what the words here signify. And that's why this kind of analogy that the prayer is as truthful as the speech of a rishi has been made. So factual word of a saint, it's a little clumsy, yes. But I suppose they're trying to get at this is right, it's pure fact. It's nothing deceitful about it at all. But it's the true word of the rishi is better. Okay, so maybe, should we risk a bonus question? If you don't have one, it's okay. Oh, maybe it's dangerous. Maybe question number 4 could be the one. Okay. Is this a messenger with a question?
Sorry, I have a question. Later on. I have a question considering. Yesterday you mentioned that in order to gain absolute bodhicitta, we should meditate on emptiness and something else I forgot. But at the same moment, I remember from Madhyamika teachings that it was that explanation that bodhisattvas on the first bhumi,
Yes.
they expressed this absolute bodhicitta because they realized this emptiness.
Yes.
So for me, it's like
Okay. Yes, that's true. Until we reach the path of vision, the third of the 5 paths, and which in Mahayana corresponds to the first bodhisattva level, we cannot have an unmediated experience of emptiness. We have only a dunchi, like a mental concept of it, a mental picture of it. These noble level bodhisattvas experience the unelaborated nature of emptiness beyond all extremes, beyond labels, beyond concepts. This we call tadrel. We can't have that. So then one might ask, well, is there any point as meditating on emptiness now, before we reach that level? And the answer is yes, because by meditating on an approximation to it, then gradually we approach to it. It's like we're creating the conditions in our mind for the real experience of emptiness to arise on the first noble level. And that is also why we in Kaju and Satya and Nyingma, when we meditate emptiness, we don't just meditate analytical concept emptiness, but we meditate settling also, so that there's really the right conditions for experiencing the unelaborated emptiness. Yeah.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a great question. As we could talk about that for about a week, but that I have to do for today. But I'm sure now studying here in Kibi, this is exactly the right place to discuss such questions. And so let's make one more dedication of merit and join our prayers to those of His Holiness. Sunam di tamshi zikpa ni tobi ni pe dhanam pam chigana chi bala dwipa sipi sola drua sho chewa kundu yanda lama dan trimi chi pela long jude sadan lamji yunten rabzene doji changi gopon yato. Okay. So we'll finish tomorrow.